and welcome to this session in a series of programmes where we've been exploring what a successful transition to digital assessment looks like. My name's Shaun Crowley. I'm the Director of International Business Development at AQA Global Assessment Services, and I'm joined in the studio by Ben Rockcliffe, who is Director of UK Business Development for AQA Assessment Services, and Gemma O'Brien, who is National Programme Manager for Alpha Plus, which is AQA's consultancy and projects unit. And I'm also joined virtually by a panel of experts from AQA Education, Alpha Plus and Inspira Assessment. In today's session, we're going to talk about data. There's a lot of opportunities, obviously, for using assessment data from digital assessments. What are those opportunities, Ben?
Digital assessments clearly create a lot more data than their previous paper-based and pen and paper-based assessments. And so, yeah, there's numerous opportunities to factor that data into the creation and ongoing improvement of assessments as they are developed, and also to use that data to support teachers and learners in their in the interpretation of the results coming out of those assessments as well.
Thank you, Ben. Gemma, what do you think are the main opportunities afforded by digital assessments in terms of using all this rich set of results data?
Adaptive assessments will offer quite a carefully and accurately calibrated measure of a learner's performance in relation to particular skills and their knowledge of particular content. And this can be really, really useful for teachers, particularly when the assessment has a formative purpose to help inform next steps in terms of teaching and learning.
Thank you, Gemma. Let's think about how data could be used to improve educational outcomes. And let's refer now to our virtual panel, and to Sophie Emerson from Inspira Assessment. Sophie, how can data be used to improve educational outcomes?
Digital assessment, of course, all of a sudden opens up a lot of possibilities for harnessing more data. So that can be data throughout the entire evaluation or assessment process, not just on candidates and their learning outcomes, primarily. It can also be used, data can also be harnessed from the content production process to compare, different types of input for the tests. You can use data to monitor the performance of questions and tests, back to parity between data and between on-screen assessment and paper-based assessment, the performance of items, the difficulty discrimination level. Data opens up this whole world of benefits for anyone who really wants to know how to improve, or just have an understanding of how is education actually working today in our country, in our region, or wherever you're harnessing data from.
Let's now bring in Adam Foley from AQA into this discussion. Adam, hi there. How can we use data to support learning outcomes rather than just measuring performance?
Data is an immensely important part of the whole educational process. What we're really trying to do with our young people is to make sure we understand where they are now, understand their strengths and their weaknesses, and understand where targeted interventions can really help. So the ability to collate that data, not just at a candidate level, which is very helpful for their learning interventions, but then looking at class level, because that then means that we can look at teacher performance and are they giving the support to the learners and covering the syllabus in the same way. But then broadening that out again, we can look at school level, so multiple teachers, how are the teachers interpreting the syllabus? Are they making sure that they're putting focus in the right areas to make those interventions work effectively? And it's all about being able to benchmark your performance, checking the students' progress, checking teachers' progress and learning outcomes against a broader corpus of data, so that you're almost checking to make sure that you're aligned and that you're focusing in on the right areas. And that's particularly important when we look at things like educational reform and moving from different standards and different syllabuses to another. Because that data, that insight can make sure that we're making the right decisions and critically putting the right interventions in place.
Okay, thank you. So let's bring in Suzanne Oates from Alpha Plus. Suzanne, hi. Tell us about how you can use data to improve teaching and learning, in particular after assessments.
We can combine classes, schools, year groups, to actually give comparative information. We can look at norms for students of that age and see how a student is comparing with their sort of national cohort or in their school. Really, the possibilities of what we can do with the data are almost endless.
Okay, thank you. And I guess, just to continue this discussion really, particularly around formative testing, just to bring in Ben and Gemma on this, how can we use data to inform formative feedback? Ben, would you like to jump in on that?
Yeah, so a formative assessment is only formative if the teacher and learner uses the information that came out of that assessment to amend or enhance their classroom practice. And the key way that we do that is through reporting that information back to the teacher and the learner. So for us as assessment professionals, the most important thing to do is to speak to the stakeholders and identify what it is they need to amend their practice, to understand what their strengths and areas of development are, and then produce reports that pinpoint that information quickly and accurately so that they can extract it with the minimum fuss possible. So we work for teachers on producing group reports that pull out that information at a class level, because teaching and learning is decided at a class level, and the teachers need to understand the main trends in terms of strengths and weaknesses for all of their pupils across the 25 or 30 or so pupils who may be in their class. Whereas for the learner, the approach is going to be different. The information will be tailored to them. So we have to produce a report in a way which can be digested by the learner so that they can understand what the assessment means for them and be empowered to act on the results from that report.
Thank you. I'd like to now talk about how we plan to use data effectively and thinking about what an end-to-end process looks like. So from my experience, coming from the authoring side of our business, we know how important it is to be able to collect assessment data at source. So when items are being written, when the tests are being created, to keep a good record of all of that really minute metadata that tells us what those items are, how they're calibrated, what kind of difficulty they are. And then you've got a lot of data that you can match to student demographic data, to their results data, through whatever platforms that we're using, through to some really useful insights. Now, the insights is really what we're interested in, isn't it? So Ben, do you want to just give us a sense of what the opportunities are for teaching and learning and improving educational outcomes when we've got a rich set of data to build our insights around?
As you said, digital assessments, they collect in a wide range of data, lots more than we've been used to in the traditional models. And this is really an emerging field. So there's all kinds of things that we have information on now that we didn't have previously. So we have candidate interaction logs that enable us to see how long a learner's been looking at an item. Then we might be able to see whether the learner has clicked on one distractor before selecting the answer key. We can see whether they opened up an additional window. All of those things, we can take all of that data, examine it, and see if there are kind of patterns that emerge that we can feed into our assessment design, and also report that back to teachers in a useful and meaningful way. Not only that, you can overlay additional research onto the assessment as well. So I'm aware of researchers who've done things like installed eye tracking equipment on top of the digital assessment so that you can see how learners are interpreting the source material. And that can really enable you to check that you're assessing the construct that you think you are. You think that the learner's reading a particular passage of text in order to get the answer, and you can confirm that through undertaking research in that way. So there's lots of possibilities there with the kinds of data that you're collecting, and that data can be fed back to both teachers, but also assessment developers and policy makers for a wide range of purposes.
Thanks, Ben. Fascinating. We could talk about this all day as far as I'm concerned. We need to move on now, and you touched on this earlier in your answer, and that's really about data security, because this is a really important part of this topic. Obviously, there are concerns that now, if we're moving to digital assessments, then we now have all of this candidate level data now that is out there. How do digital exams platforms keep that data private?
So this is a really important question, Shaun, that we get asked about all the time. And I think it's about data security by design from inception. So it's really important when you start working with your client to understand what their particular security requirements are. And data sovereignty is a term that you used in that is really important, particularly when you're working in international context. As we all know, data can be stored around the world in various different locations. And normally ministries of education or clients who are working in a particular area quite rightly want the information relating to their learners stored in a jurisdiction close to them or in their own jurisdiction, so they have control over that information, and the data has been stored in accordance with the rules and requirements of their particular jurisdiction.
Thank you. Let's bring in Adam Foley now from AQA. Adam, hi. Are there any challenges around data security that we need to consider?
There are some challenges around security, but that's why we ensure that we have multi-factor authentication when the candidate logs in. So not only are we making sure that it's the right candidate in front of the right machine, we're also making sure that we've got secure encrypted content which can't be accessed before the date of the exam. So when we talk about the administration process that sits around the delivery of digital exams, our schools can download the content in advance and access it on the morning. And because of that multi-factor authentication, the data, the information, the exam paper just sits there dormant and secure right up until the moment of the exam. But the other benefit, of course, is that once the candidate has completed the exam, all of that information is stored securely, encrypted, and uploaded directly to our platform. So it massively reduces the risk of any logistical challenges of physically moving papers from location to location. It makes sure that the essence, the exact response that the candidate is given gets directly to the marker, so that there's no risk of any issues occurring in between that process.
Thanks, Adam. And just a follow-up question. How do we use secure encryption and resilience to safeguard tested content?
The ability to use that content doesn't require an internet connection, which means it can work entirely offline from the moment that it's been downloaded. So it reduces that risk. But the benefit of having an internet connection means that it does offer another dimension of resilience. So as the candidate is completing their exam, if there's an internet connection available, the candidate's responses are stored securely and again encrypted and sent directly to our platform, so that the candidate's responses are held secure in the event of an issue occurring. So if the device were to fail, if there were a power cut, as soon as power was restored, the candidate could go back onto any machine and access their content again.
Thank you, Adam. That's really interesting. I'd like to now bring in Inspira assessment into this, because we hear a lot about this phrase privacy by design. So Simon, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, one of the really critical elements of digital assessment is privacy and data security. It's really important that any digital assessment platform is designed from the ground up to be secure. Different countries have different data protection requirements. What's in common is the GDPR, clearly. There's lots of different methodologies we can adopt to ensure that test takers are able to access the platform securely, but we don't need to know who those test takers are. There needs to be an anonymous identifier for each test taker, so that the awarding organisation awarding those different qualifications knows exactly who sat which test when, but that doesn't need to be shared with the testing platform.
Thank you. And Sophie Emmerson, can you reassure people about the public perception of holding data, which seems to be different across different EU countries?
Most governments are beginning to understand that, of course, data needs to be secured, safely stored and hosted in adherence to all legislation there. But cloud hosting is not so dangerous. It lives up to the GDPR principles, as long as you design a platform within privacy by design principles. So there is an absolute way forward using cloud, using the benefits of cloud when it comes to scalability, for example, and efficiency, and making sure that everything on exam day runs smoothly. You can still use cloud as long as you adhere to privacy by design principles. You're within absolute the confines of any GDPR legislation out there.
Okay. Now, a lot of people, a lot of governments are interested in standardised international tests, PISA, PIRLS, TIMSS. How can we use insight from those tests to understand performance?
Yeah, I get asked about this a lot, Shaun, as well. And I think it's important to understand why these assessments are important, first of all. So it's not just about the fact that they grab attention, grabbing headlines. It's because they assess really key constructs for young learners. They are the constructs of literacy, numeracy, and science. And these have been shown time and again to be really key gateway constructs to accessing other areas of the curriculum. And indeed, there's lots of research out there that shows that if you can improve in these areas, then you can see your educational scores improve across the board. So that's why it is important. Now, doing more assessment around those assessments in of itself is not going to help countries improve their results, but what it can do is provide that additional insight that you need to identify where you need to focus your efforts in order to improve. You can identify, okay, learners are doing particularly well here, but they're not doing as well here. So we need to provide professional development for teachers in this area. We need to put in place additional support and intervention for learners on that area there. Additionally, if you've just come out of one of these rounds of international assessment, you can use the findings from additional assessments that are around that to supplement your understanding of what's happened. So you might get a particular score from these assessments, but then when you combine that with your own national assessments, it can provide a really rich information source upon which you can base policy making to try and drive up results in the longer term.
Well, it's been a really interesting discussion. We've been looking here around opportunities for the future. So let's just wrap this up with a few final thoughts. And we'll be talking about digital assessment. What does digital assessment look like in the future? What does the classroom of 2040 look like, Gemma?
Well, I wouldn't like to say that I can see into the future, Shaun, but I'm hopeful that in the classroom of 2040 we might see more culturally responsive approaches to pedagogy and see that reflected in assessment as well. I think it's also likely that we'll see a greater emphasis on personalised assessment approaches, which provide feedback to learners to help them understand where they are in their learning journey.
Ben, what does the 2040 classroom look like for you?
What I do think we'll see is lots more on-screen and digital assessment than we have now. And what that's going to empower is a much more integrated approach to the way in which we assess. Now, for practical reasons, quite often we have to separate out the different areas and skills that we assess into different kind of modules of assessment because of the difficulty in combining those together into one single overall test. Digital assessment is going to facilitate bringing those together, meaning that we can have a much more rounded and holistic view of the learner through those assessments.
Thanks, Ben. And some final thoughts from Adam Foley. Adam, what does the classroom of 2040 look like and why should we be excited?
Technology has the opportunity to give people access to things that they would never see in their day-to-day life. You know, the idea of using things like immersive environments to really help show students worlds that they might not have access to. That's the real opportunity. That unlocks the potential of what digital can provide. Now, what I'm talking about here is if we could get augmented reality, virtual reality, which technology is around and the cost of these devices is continuing to drop. But having that technology in the classroom means that students can see things, can interact with things that they wouldn't have done before. We can make connections. If we had students in schools anywhere in the world, they can interact with each other through these virtual environments and really create very compelling ways of learning. Now, in my mind, I'd like to think about if you could put a candidate in a real historical setting and ask questions about the environment, that level of immersive learning would be tremendous. And we know that when you add multiple components of stimulus material together, that your mind absorbs it more effectively. The learning speed, the rate of adoption is increased. And that's what artificial intelligence is starting to do. We're already seeing consumers, customers, and suppliers out there that are creating very real opportunities for that interactive dialogue. It's creating a very different way of learning. And in actual fact, that will really help us on this learning journey towards moving away from recall of facts and information and actually moving towards a model where we are getting our young people to look at scenario-based solutions. You know, can they work in a simulated environment to create the right solution? And that means we might have to break away from some of the norms of accepted testing and think about things in a very different way, in an evolutionary way. So I think technology has a real potential to play a huge part in how we assess and how we teach and how we learn. But we're already starting to see us on that journey. We're already starting to see that technology being adopted. And it's a really exciting time at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, it's been a really interesting discussion. And that completes the final session in this series where we've been looking at digital assessments, and how we can implement them. I hope you found it interesting. Thank you very much for watching, and thank you for our studio panelists and our virtual panelists who've joined us as well, and goodbye.